April 9th, 2021. White Plains Hospital, New York. Outside the sliding glass doors, a crowd is gathering. Fans clutch pit bull puppies, old CD covers, homemade posters. Some wear rough Ryders jackets faded with age. Others light candles in the cool night air. A chorus of voices chant prayers, cries, and DMX's most famous ad-libs. Growls, barks, echoes of a man whose voice once shook arenas. Inside, the machines hum steady. Beeping monitors count the seconds as the world waits for news about Earl Simmons, the man the world knows as DMX. The headlines flash across every television. Twitter floods with hashtags. The hip-hop community, from legends to new school rappers, posts, tributes, and prayers. This is more than just another hospital vigil. This is history holding its breath. Because DMX wasn't like anyone else. He wasn't polished. He wasn't perfect. He was raw, unfiltered, painfully human. His voice could cut through concrete, but behind the bark was a wounded child. A believer, a sinner, a fighter, a prophet. In that moment, fans weren't just praying for a rapper. They were praying for a man who had carried their pain, screamed their frustrations, and offered them hope through his own battles. This is where our story begins. Not with the fame, not with the platinum records, but with the end looming in sight. To understand why thousands gathered in Yonkers, Harlem, and far beyond, to understand why his passing shook the culture so deeply, we need to go back to the streets of Yonkers, back to a boy named Earl who found friendship in stray dogs, rhythm in the chaos, and escape in words. Back to the beginning of the man who would become DMX. This is more than music. This is a story of struggle, survival, and legacy. Every beat carries a memory, every lyric, a confession. From the streets to the stage, from the cell to the spotlight, these are the untold chapters behind the icons. Welcome to the Hip Hop Files podcast. Earl Simmons was born on December 18th, 1970, in Mount Vernon, New York. But his story truly takes shape in Yonkers, just north of the Bronx. Yonkers was the kind of city where a child had to grow up fast, and for Earl, childhood slipped away almost before it began. Raised mostly by his mother, he grew up in a household where love was scarce, and discipline often came in the form of harsh words or violent outbursts. Earl longed for stability, but instead faced neglect and abuse that left deep emotional scars. Nights were restless, not only from the chaos at home, but also from asthma attacks that jolted him awake, gasping for air and fighting to breathe. It was as if life itself was trying to choke him before he even had a chance to start. Outside, Yonkers in the late 1970s and early 80s was a crucible of poverty and crime. Drugs seeped into every corner, and broken families were the norm. For many kids, the streets became a second home. And for Earl, they were the only place that felt real. School couldn't hold his attention. Classrooms felt cold, detached, and unforgiving. Instead, stairwells, street corners, and alleyways became his true education. He learned toughness, survival, and how to wear pain like armor. In the middle of all that darkness, Earl found light in the most unexpected companions: dogs. Stray dogs roamed Yonkers the same way lost kids did, searching for scraps of food and scraps of love. Earl fed them, trained them, and in return, they gave him the loyalty and protection he was missing from the humans around him. They became his confidants, his family, his reflection. The growls and barks he mimicked weren't just sounds. They were expressions of the raw energy building inside him. This bond would become inseparable from the man and artist he would later become. By his early teens, Earl was drifting further from home and deeper into the streets. He hustled, stole, and ran with other kids who were trying to carve out their own piece of survival. Trouble wasn't just around him, it was inside him, pushing him towards self-destruction, even as it sharpened his instincts. But beneath the fights, the thefts, and the bravado, something else was beginning to surface. A gift for rhythm. Earl found himself stringing together words, rhymes that carried the weight of his pain and the pulse of the streets. The abuse, the neglect, the asthma, the bond with dogs, the nights spent outside, the constant struggle to breathe, to survive, to be seen. All of it was shaping the voice of a young man who would one day roar across the world as DMX. This is the beginning of that transformation. Earl Simmons, the broken boy from Yonkers, was learning to turn pain into power. DMX, on his turbulent childhood.
I used to get beat a lot of beatings. If I did something wrong, and would wait till I go to sleep, climb on my back, and just like beat me so much. She used to beat me till she was tired. I think that's why it's hard for me to sleep sometimes. But we had a rule. I mean, it's like whatever went on in the house, you can keep it in the house. She would always threaten us with, white people are gonna come take you away. You want that? You want that? I mean, this around it gives me away anyway. You know what I'm saying? At 7, and I got put in institutions. I go into college with the kids, and she leaves. And when she came back, I'm expecting. A few hours later, she comes back. I'm like, all right, I'm ready to get out of there. I don't know anybody here. I'm like, and she's like, all right, see you in 3 months. I bring a toothbrush, nothing. I mean, I had no clothes, anything. And it's like from way across the room. Like, all right, see you in 3 months. I think that's when the problem was born.
By the time Earl Simmons reached his teenage years, the streets of Yonkers had become both his battlefield and his classroom. Home was no longer a place of safety. It was a place he escaped from. Out there, survival meant hustling, stealing, and moving with crews who lived by the same code. Eat or be eaten. Earl's reputation began to grow. He was tough, unpredictable, and always carried that wild energy. But behind the aggression was still the same boy, searching for belonging, for love, for something real. That need often led him deeper into trouble. Juvenile detention centers became revolving doors, places where he spent months at a time. In those locked-up moments, Earl began to lean more heavily on his words. He would scribble rhymes, beat on tables, and spit verses with a rawness that couldn't be ignored. His pain translated into rhythm, and his anger became poetry. Inside those walls, rap was more than entertainment. It was survival, a way to earn respect without fists. A young DMX, freestyling, in Yonkers, New York.
Like they want it, I'ma give it to them, do them. Buck stepping on them, step through them. In and out of them, a lot of them know the Timo. They know better than push it up and fly. I don't see no nitwit competitors, get whipped, the predator, sick whip, senator, bullshit, the editor, king of the throne, skull and crossbone, divine master of the unknown with the microphone, I've thrown, shown and proven. A rap ain't shit unless it gets the crowd moving.
When he came back to the streets, rap followed him. Earl would battle kids on corners, freestyling with a voice that already carried that signature growl. He was fearless with a mic, the same way he was fearless with dogs or with trouble. The difference was that rap gave him something the streets couldn't, a sense of purpose, a glimpse of who he might become. Every rhyme, every battle, every night locked away in juvie was another step in the transformation. The boy called Earl Simmons was slowly being replaced by something harder, louder, and far more dangerous. The name that would echo from Yonkers to the world was beginning to take shape. This is where Earl Simmons starts becoming DMX. Back on the streets, Earl's name was beginning to spread through Yonkers. He wasn't just another kid hanging on the corner anymore. He was the one people wanted to see battle. With every freestyle, every rhyme thrown down in stairwells or on benches, he was sharpening his voice into a weapon. That growl, that raw delivery, it cut through the noise and made people stop and listen. Yonkers was filled with hungry young rappers, but Earl stood out. His verses weren't just clever lines. They were lived experiences, spit with the intensity of someone who had survived things most kids couldn't imagine. He carried his pain like fuel, and the streets responded. Crowds gathered when he rapped. Win or lose, everyone knew they had just witnessed something real. Jadakiss of the Locks on DMX and his early years.
This was already a star in Yonkers in our eyes, right. Maybe 7 to 10 years before he ever dropped the album. He been rocking and selling tapes in the hood and doing show. X did a show, live, well, it was in one of the high schools or, a school gymnasium in Yonkers with leaders of the new school. Wow. When they had just another case of, he held his own. Wow. X got up there with unreleased, never heard material, only in Yonkers, and killed it. Right. You know what I mean? And so once he got with Ruff Ryders and we started getting nicer and rhyming, we was the first. It wasn't even like a formal meeting. He came to the block, yo, dog, I got these dudes. Y'all gonna be with me, dog. We gonna be on Ruff Ryders. And he bought them and then that was it.
When the battles were over and the crowds faded, one thing was clear. Earl Simmons wasn't just another kid rhyming on the block. He was different. The streets had already started whispering about him, passing his name from one corner to another. Word traveled fast in Yonkers, and soon kids from other neighborhoods came looking to test him, to see if the stories were true. Each time, Earl delivered. His flow was raw, his presence commanding, and his voice, that deep, guttural growl, set him apart. He wasn't trying to sound like anyone else. He was creating something entirely his own. What others dismissed as aggression was really his truth. His survival laid bare in every rhyme. As his reputation grew, so did the idea of a new name. Earl Simmons was the boy who had endured pain, neglect, and endless battles. But on the mic, he was transforming into something harder, more unbreakable. That transformation took form in the name DMX, inspired partly by the Oberheim DMX drum machine he'd first used in a boy's home, and partly by the identity he was carving out for himself. It was short, sharp, and unforgettable, just like him. Now, when he stepped into a circle, people didn't say, "Here comes Earl." They said, "DMX is here." And with that, the kid from Yonkers officially had an identity strong enough to carry his voice beyond the block. The street battles weren't just practice anymore. They were the opening rounds of a fight for recognition, for survival, and for a future no one thought was possible. This was no longer about a boy named Earl trying to be heard. This was about DMX, and the whole world was about to find out just who he was. By the late 1980s, DMX had gone from a name whispered in Yonkers stairwells to a force that couldn't be ignored. His reputation as a battle rapper was solid, but now he was hungry for more. Battling kids on corners was one thing, making music that could outlast a single night was another. DMX wanted permanence, and that meant recording. His earliest recordings were raw, gritty tapes passed from hand to hand in Yonkers. He would borrow equipment wherever he could, often sneaking into makeshift studios or using beat-up tape decks. What those tapes lacked in polish, they made up for in pure energy. DMX's voice, raspy, aggressive, and unrelenting, jumped off the cassette. People who heard them didn't just nod their heads. They felt something. It was pain. It was rage. It was survival set to rhythm. Yonkers was buzzing. Local DJs began spinning his tapes, and kids were quoting his rhymes in schoolyards. In a borough that had already produced talents like Mary J. Blige and the LOX, DMX was carving his own lane. He wasn't smooth R&B. He wasn't flashy. He was the streets, unfiltered. His authenticity was his weapon, and people gravitated toward it. But DMX wasn't satisfied with local fame. He wanted to be tested against the best. He traveled beyond Yonkers, hitting New York's open mics and showcases. In smoky clubs and packed basements, he went head-to-head with other hungry MCs. Time and again, he left with the crowd on his side. His energy was unmatched. When DMX rapped, you couldn't ignore him. Still, the climb wasn't easy. Studios cost money, and opportunities often came with strings attached. DMX was still hustling, still caught in the same cycle of survival that had defined his youth. He'd record one day and be back on the block the next. But every tape, every performance, every battle was another brick in the foundation of his rise. By the early 1990s, the Yonkers kid, who once rapped to survive in juvenile homes, had become a name to watch in New York's underground. The fire that started in broken homes and back alleys was now spreading, fueled by his relentless drive and unmistakable voice. Earl Simmons was no more. DMX was here. And for the first time, the world outside of Yonkers was starting to take notice. Drag on the raw energy of his friend, DMX.
Yep, out of this world. Like the energy he had, you know what I mean? You know, it was a time where I was stuck on a few bars or stuff like that, like on a rhyme, right? And I'd be stuck on one, I'd be like this, yo. And I'd be like, this is half of what I got. But now I'm stuck right there. And then he'd just come up with the rest of my line real quick, like, when it was about drag, you thinking too much, bro. Listen, just write the joint. First thing come to your mind, write it down. That's it. Like his energy was totally different. I'm like, nah, I want to sit back and take my time. He like, yeah. See, that's what it is. See, trying to be extra lyrical or the lyrical man. Listen, write the first thing come to your mind. Spit it like you mean it, and it's gonna be good. And that's what he was. You follow what I'm trying to say? If you really listen to him, yeah, he had bars, but a lot of his stuff was just real. You know what I mean? A lot of his rhymes that he wrote and wrote it was like the first thing came to his mind. Like, listen, if I thought about this must have meant something, so I'm gonna write that down. And then he just makes sure he say it right. You know what I'm saying? That was his thing, you know what I mean? Far as delivery, you know what I mean? Bars, he didn't really care about that. Like, you follow what I'm trying to say? Like, X would get on a MC song that got super bars and kill them with just his delivery and energy. You know what I mean? You want more? You want though? You want the and that was just his energy. You know what I mean? It wasn't really too much about, you know what I mean? Like he'd write down first thing come to his mind sometimes. Like he only with no thought, you know what I mean? So his energy was through the roof, because I never really seen no rapper do that like that.
By the early 1990s, DMX had built a reputation that stretched far beyond Yonkers. His name was circulating through New York's underground, his tapes were passing hand to hand, and his battles were the stuff of local legend. But turning that raw buzz into a career was never going to be easy. The music industry was a maze, and DMX was entering it from the outside. He began grinding through every connection he could find, DJs, promoters, small-time managers. He recorded verses wherever there was an open mic. whoever had a beat machine or a spare track. His early singles like Born Loser showed flashes of his talent, but didn't get the push they needed. Labels were hesitant. They couldn't quite package him, couldn't smooth out the edges that made him so authentic. DMX wasn't polished, he wasn't pretty, and in an era chasing radio-friendly hits, that made him a hard sell. Behind the scenes, his personal struggles continued to weigh him down. The same battles with poverty and addiction that had followed him since childhood made it difficult to stay consistent. One moment he was recording in studios, the next he was hustling in the streets, caught in the same cycle that had defined his teenage years. Each near miss with a label deal, each promise that fizzled out, only added to the frustration. But DMX was relentless. He refused to quit. He pushed his mixtapes harder, showing up at clubs and handing them out, sometimes even selling them on corners. DJs began to take notice, spinning his tracks in underground spots where raw energy was appreciated more than polish. His voice, that gravelly bark, that uncontainable intensity, started to cut through. What made him stand out wasn't just the aggression, it was the honesty. DMX wasn't pretending to be a gangster, or a player, or a superstar. He was telling his truth, the abuse, the addiction, the dogs, the desperation, and doing it in a way that felt larger than life. Audiences connected with that vulnerability masked in ferocity. They saw themselves in his pain, and they believed every word. By the mid-1990s, DMX was at a crossroads. He had tasted recognition, but hadn't yet broken through. He was respected on the streets and feared in battles, but he was still fighting for a seat at the industry's table. His story was building pressure like a volcano, all the pain, frustration, and setbacks waiting for the right moment to explode. And soon, that explosion would come. The industry wasn't ready, but the world was about to hear DMX, Chic Luch, of the Locks.
X, come on, man. X was like the first battle rapper to us. X was really robbing people and rapping about it later. Like, yo, man, X was getting high and bugging out with this dog and having a dog rob you. And I'm not making this up, man. Yo, Luch, yo. And then we wound up, he told the Rough Riders, DNY about us, and they became management. And X would like try to ask, can he keep the dog at my house? My mama come home with the dog in the living room, but the dog won't do nothing. I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But X was, X, rest in peace, so solid, man. Yes. But was really, really living that life.
By the mid-1990s, DMX was teetering between recognition and obscurity. On the streets and in the underground, he was already a legend. The growling voice, the intensity, the battles that left entire blocks buzzing. But in the eyes of the industry, he was still a gamble. Too raw, too unpredictable, too real. That was the paradox of DMX. Everything that made him magnetic to the streets made him difficult for record executives to understand. Labels wanted polish, hooks, and radio-ready singles. DMX offered none of that. What he did offer was something far rarer, authenticity. Every bar, every bark, every growl carried the weight of a life scarred by pain and survival. And slowly, that raw truth began to shift from being a liability to becoming his greatest asset. The turning point came through persistence. DMX never stopped grinding. He was recording verses on any beat he could get his hands on, handing out tapes to DJs, battling whoever stepped up. That relentlessness began to attract the attention of industry figures who weren't looking for polish. They were looking for impact, and nobody had impact like DMX. In Yonkers, another wave of talent was rising at the same time. A group of young rappers who called themselves the Locks. Together with Mary J. Blige, they were putting Yonkers firmly on the map. The city that had always been overshadowed by the Bronx, and Harlem was now demanding its place in hip-hop history. And while the Locks brought sharp lyricism and street poetics, DMX brought unfiltered fury. They respected each other, sharpened each other, and together they made Yonkers one of the most feared breeding grounds for rap talent in New York. The buzz grew louder. Mixtapes featuring DMX verses began circulating throughout the 5 boroughs. DJs played his tracks not because they were clean or catchy, but because they demanded attention. He had the kind of presence that made clubs pause. You didn't talk over a DMX verse, you listened. But while the streets were with him, the industry remained hesitant. DMX had already experienced false starts with smaller deals and broken promises. Each time he walked away more frustrated, but also more determined. By 1997, though, the momentum was undeniable. Hip-hop itself was shifting. The glossy era of radio hits and shiny suits was starting to clash with a growing hunger for grit, for reality. The timing was finally aligning with DMX's truth. That's when Def Jam came calling. The legendary label, already home to giants like LL Cool J and Method Man, was looking for the next wave to carry them into the new era. They didn't just want another rapper, they wanted a movement, a voice that could shake the culture. In DMX, they saw exactly that. His rawness wasn't something to hide. It was the weapon they could unleash on the world. When DMX signed with Def Jam, it wasn't just another contract. It was a declaration that the industry could no longer ignore him. And the moment he stepped into a professional studio with proper backing, the result was explosive. Tracks like Get At Me Dog captured everything he had lived for. The aggression, the growl, the street energy, packaged in a way that could still cut through on radio. The song became a breakout single, climbing charts and blaring from car stereos across the city. Fans who had followed him since the Yonkers battles already knew what was coming. But now the rest of the world was catching on. DMX wasn't just another rapper, he was an energy, a force. His stage performances were unlike anything hip-hop had seen. Shirtless, barking, sweating, praying, crying, roaring. He didn't just rap his songs, he lived them in front of you. Crowds didn't just attend DMX shows, they experienced them. Def Jam had bet on the one thing the streets already knew. DMX couldn't be contained. And in 1998, when he dropped his debut album, It's Dark and Hell is Hot, that bet paid off. The record was a cultural earthquake. Raw, uncompromising, and deeply personal, it resonated with fans across the globe. Songs like Ruff, Ryders' Anthem and Stop Being Greedy didn't just get played, they became anthems of defiance, survival, and loyalty. In less than a year, DMX went from a kid scraping together mixtapes in Yonkers to a Def Jam superstar. His album debuted at #1, a feat that proved the industry had been wrong to doubt him all those years. The pain, the bark, the growl, the dogs, the prayers, all of it came together in a way hip-hop had never seen. For DMX, the breakthrough wasn't just about success, it was validation. Every beating, every night gasping for breath, every dog he fed in the cold, every rhyme scribbled in juvie, it all led to this. The world had finally heard his roar, and this was only the beginning. Russell Simmons, on the impact of DMX on Def Jam Records.
I'm doing very well at Def Jam, and I was in Malibu. I think I was more focused on other companies But Kevin and Leo sent me a young executive by the name of Irv Gotti. And Irv came to me and he was bouncing. That's how it's gotta go, man. It's gotta be like this. And he was talking about the way the beat had to feel, right? Just kind of a typical thing an A&R director might do. And that's what Irv was doing. It's like, that's what we gotta do. And I remember getting on the Stairmaster and he started to talk. And I remember staying on the Stairmaster for an hour, which was almost double what I usually did 40 minutes or so. So for an hour, I interviewed this young man. And of course, Leo and Kevin already had their minds set on hiring him, so I approved him and he went to work. And I kept thinking about the way the music had to sound, the way he was animated and excited. And then not too long after that, I remember doing an interview on Hot 97, and I heard a record by the Lops. And there's a part in the record, and most of you hip-hop fans know, he said, niggas talking shit, back the truck up. Like, wow, what is this? And then he wasn't a member of the Lops, and I called the office. I said, I just heard the most amazing vocalist. And Leon said, oh, he's signed to us. So I went to the office and I heard Get At Me, Dog. And it was, to me, so special because Def Jam was built and based on loud, aggressive, abrasive music and vocals to match. That's what we were loud, we were alternative. And that was the most alternative record I heard in our office for a long time. It epitomized what we thought Def Jam was supposed to be. Other records were out, they were more polished, they were more R&B. And we kind of rebelled. From the beginning, we talked about how Def Jam didn't do that. Of course, the world was changing, and we were falling behind because there was lots of melody in music. Hip-hop was melodic, but nothing like Get At Me, Dog. And Get At Me, Dog was going against the grain and reminded me of what we loved at Def Jam. So I was so excited. I remember going to the tunnel when he first performed it and watching him perform it like, wow, Def Jam is back. Sure enough, he saved Def Jam. And it was a moment for us, and lots of other things happened around that time, and Def Jam exploded. But he pulled us out of the mud and brought us back to life. He also made it exciting for me. And Earl Simmons was a hero, a personal hero of mine, and a music hero for me. His music and what he and Rough Ryders created was so special. And what Irv Gotti helped him create, helped to bring us, was so special.
1998 wasn't just another year in hip-hop. It was the year of DMX. When It's Dark and Hell Is Hot dropped in May, the world got its first full taste of everything DMX had been building in Yonkers, on mixtapes, and in battles. The album was more than a debut. It was a manifesto. The growl, the prayers, the aggression, the vulnerability. It was all there, packaged in one body of work that hit harder than anyone expected. Critics praised it, fans devoured it, and the streets claimed it as their own. Within weeks, DMX was no longer just the new guy at Def Jam. He was their new champion. But what made 1998 truly historic wasn't just the debut. It was what came next. Just 7 months later, in December, DMX returned with his second album, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood. Dropping 2 albums in 1 year was already rare, but having both of them debut at #1 on the Billboard charts was unprecedented. DMX had done what no other rapper had achieved before. He dominated the game twice in the same calendar year. In an era where artists usually took years between releases, DMX showed up back-to-back and crushed everything in sight. The impact was massive. Suddenly, hip-hop had a new face, a new sound, a new energy. While other rappers chased radio hits or flashy lifestyles, DMX brought darkness, rawness, and honesty. He rapped about demons, about faith, about death, about survival. Yet he did it in a way that was still anthemic. When Rough Ryders' anthem played in the clubs or on the streets, entire crowds moved as one. The Rough Ryders, once just a local crew, now became a worldwide brand. Bikes, leather jackets, pit bulls, the imagery spread everywhere. DMX wasn't just making music, he was leading a movement. Yonkers, a city that had often been overlooked in the shadow of New York's bigger boroughs, was now firmly on the map. Alongside the Locks, who were also exploding onto the scene, Yonkers had become a powerhouse. What separated DMX from everyone else was the balance in his music. He could deliver songs like "Stop Being Greedy" that sounded like war chants, and then turn around and drop prayers that revealed his deepest vulnerability. On stage, he would command thousands with ferocity, only to drop to his knees and pray with them moments later. Fans connected with that humanity. He wasn't selling an image. He was bearing his soul. 1998 turned DMX into more than a rapper. He was a cultural phenomenon. Magazines plastered his face on covers. His music videos were in heavy rotation on MTV and BET, and his concerts were packed with fans who barked back at him as if they were part of his pack. He brought a theatrical intensity to hip-hop that felt closer to a revival than a rap show. And yet, behind all the success, the struggle remained. The same demons that fueled his music followed him everywhere. The addiction, the chaos, the pain that had been with him since childhood. But in 1998, none of that could stop the momentum. DMX had arrived, and he wasn't just another star. He was the voice of a generation that felt overlooked, angry, and searching for truth. By the end of the year, the numbers spoke for themselves. 2 #1 albums, millions of records sold. Streets, clubs, radios, and households across the world echoing with his growls and anthems. In 1 year, DMX had gone from an underground legend to one of the biggest rappers on the planet. 1998 wasn't just his breakout. It was his coronation. The dog had finally claimed his throne. Irv Gotti on DMX and his impact.
Ja, really, because Leo wanted to sign Ja. The first meeting I ever had, I was like, we got to sign DMX. And they laughed at me. I remember when I left the office, Tina Davis said, she knew what I wanted to sign DMX. She said, if DMX don't sell, your ass is fired. Jay and Dame did not believe in DMX. Jay would be like, you think he's better than me? And I'd be like, he's nice just like you. I said, if you look in the hood, there's less of like you and more like him. Yeah, but he don't want to live that. He's depressing, Gotti. And I said, I don't give a f. So Jay used to watch me grind with X, and he was off with the Hitman. And then something strange happened when I made Get At Me Dog. If you remember at the beginning of the video, it's the heartbeats. Doom, DMX, doom, doom. Live at the tunnel. Y'all don't even remember the tunnel. Funk Master Voice, doom, doom. And then I put that sound bite. Let's take it back to the streets, mother. Doom, doom. The video's flashing, f***ing up your eyes. It caused change. And now, there was no more shiny suits. We back to the hood, and X is the leader of this revolution. I used to put on the wall a triangle with 5. And it was like, they used to clown me. And they used to be like, who's gonna buy his records, Gotti? Chihuahuas, he's barking. No one wants to hear that bullshit. And I'd be like, yeah. So 5. It was no more writing on the walls. It was, y'all can get behind me. I used to tell Leo in the midst of the whole staff, and I would tell him, yo, shut the f*** up, yo. I said, you work better when you shut up and get behind me. Now this is what we doing. And he would shut up.
By 1999, DMX was no longer just a rapper. He was a superstar. The momentum from 1998 carried straight into the new year, and it seemed like nothing could slow him down. His music dominated the charts, his presence dominated the stage, and his influence dominated the culture. Everywhere you looked, DMX was there. The Ruff Ryders movement had exploded. What began as a tight-knit crew from Yonkers had transformed into a full-fledged brand. The bikes, the leather vests, the dogs. It was more than an image. It was a lifestyle, and millions of fans embraced it. With DMX at the center, Ruff Ryders became a household name, proof that the streets could create an empire without compromise. And then came Hollywood. DMX's charisma was too powerful to be contained to music alone. His first major film role, Belly, 1998, showcased a raw authenticity that blurred the line between character and reality. Audiences weren't just watching DMX act, they were watching DMX be. The success of Belly led to more opportunities, and soon he was starring alongside heavyweights like Jet Li, Steven Seagal, and Aaliyah. His performances weren't polished or traditional, but they were magnetic. Just like in music, his presence demanded attention. By the turn of the millennium, DMX was everywhere. Radio, TV, movies, magazines, and stages across the world. His concerts became legendary events. Packed stadiums filled with tens of thousands of fans all barking back at him in unison, creating moments that felt closer to religious revivals than rap shows. No matter where you came from, no matter your background, a DMX performance made you feel part of something larger. But what truly set him apart was the duality. On one track, he could deliver unrelenting fury, an anthem for the streets, and on the next, he could fall to his knees in prayer, begging for forgiveness, crying out for guidance. This raw honesty connected with fans on a deeper level than most artists ever achieved. He wasn't untouchable. He wasn't perfect. He was human. And that humanity, wrapped in ferocity, made him unforgettable. By the end of the 90s, DMX had achieved what few thought possible. 2 #1 albums in 1 year, a third one on the way, blockbuster movies, and a cultural movement that spanned the globe. He had gone from a neglected child in Yonkers, gasping for breath in the dark, to one of the most recognizable voices in the world. You've been listening to the Hip Hop Files. Follow, subscribe, and if these episodes moved you, leave us a 5-star review. And most of all, keep the music alive. Next week, in part 2 of DMX, we dive into the darker chapters, the struggles with addiction, the battles with demons, and the fight to hold on to everything he built. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on the Hip Hop Files.